A is for apathy. By Stoner Shy. If we had just kept moving, I never would have gotten us into this mess. How much farther would it have been to the next town? We would have made it with no trouble. All we had to do was keep waiting, and everything would have been fine. All I could do now is ask myself, how did it happen? That day started out like any other day. Things needed fixing, and I was the point to fix them. Word of mouth pointed me to the bar in the middle of town, and after a little chat with the owner, I forget his name, I got to work. While I was finishing up, I remember saying something like, "Who do you have working on this before me?" He then said, "Couple of folks, tell the truth. None of them can figure it out. The ones that did only got it to work for a few days before we're breaking out again." Well, it looks to me like somebody tried to half-ass a patch-up, and then somebody else tried to half-ass another patch-up on top of that. I thumped the thing a few times with my hoof. And anyone else that took a crack at this just banged on it with a wrench. The owner laughed. "Huh, yeah, I figured as much. Anyway, the caps are yours, and I'll give you a drink on the house if you like." That sounded good to me. I picked up my tools and followed him out the bar. He turned his radio down and slid his hoof towards the grubby-looking bottles on the back shelf. And I pointed to the chin. "You plan on selling here? Goddess knows this town could use a pony that knows how to keep things up and running." I shook my head as the owner poured me a shot. Then I took it between my hooves and knocked it back. It was good stuff, and I appreciated that. The wife wants to keep moving. I guess she thinks she'll have a better luck selling things if she's got more competition. I slid the glass back to him. Besides, if I shut up shop here, I'm gonna run out of things fixed pretty fast. He smiled at his strike, then he said, "Usually it's the unicorns that know their way around maintenance. But I guess they don't wander through here to get avoided." I think he chuckled a little after that. Can't say I blame him, I told him. I didn't have a horn. That meant I wasn't anything too special around types like him. But I was sitting at his bar, so just to be safe I added, "Caps are caps, though. You do what you gotta do." He nodded a little, scooping up a rag and wiping down the corner. "Where are you heading then?" The gid's aftertaste was fading fast. "Out to the coast, Manhattan." I ran my tongue over my teeth. "Maybe Philadelphia." That got his attention. "Me and my boys are from Philly." He stopped polishing and looked at me in the eyes. "If you had number Philly, you ought to see about working for Red Eye proper." "Mind if I give you a reference?" I asked, smirking. "Oh yeah, sure. Just put me on your resume." After he got the last hour assistant, he smiled and waved a hoof toward the door. "No joke, though. You put in the hard work, Red Eye will pay you fair." He pointed the same hoof towards my chest. "Especially a pony that can fix things." I was about to say something when I heard something shouting outside. There were already several ponies barging in by the time I had turned to look. At first glance, you might mistake them for raiders with the way they were dressed. But a slaver is just a tamed raider, really. "We got one of them!" they shouted over one another. "He ain't told us where the rest are yet!" There was a colt with them that stuck right out. Mostly because he had been battered until he couldn't open his eyes. He was screaming too, but his were pleas for help. I realized a moment later that they were dragging him, and that because his hind legs had been broken. Got to my hind hooves, but the owner put his rag down. I remember him giving me this casual little nod as he turned the radio up again, flooding the room with music. "Sorry for the racket. I gotta deal with this." He tried around the bar to join them, calling back with, "Thanks again for the help." First, all I could think was, he can't be a year older than my son. As they held the colt down, I took the bag of caps off the counter, where he had left them for me. Then I looked down at my tools. The memories started flooding my mind, drowning out everything else. There were 5 of them, plus the bartender. They all had their backs turned, focusing on the screaming, squirming colt. I asked myself, how fast could I club one of them to death? How quickly would they draw their weapons? How long would it take for help to arrive? Maybe if I were younger, I told myself, turning toward the door. Maybe if I didn't have a wife and foal to take care of. I could still hear the screams over the music when I closed the door behind me, but the farther I walked, the easier they were to ignore. My son, Slate, was playing with other colts and fillies a few buildings down, all of them squawking and laughing. He grinned and waved when he noticed me, but he kept on playing. Looking at Slate made me think back to when I just walked away from at the bar, but I knew it would pass soon enough. My wife, Leanne, had put together a little stand in front of the inn. She didn't look too thrilled, at no point seemed interested, but seeing me raised her spirits. We shared a kiss behind the makeshift counter. That made me feel a little better, but she could probably tell that my smile wasn't honest. Leanne also noticed the way my eyes were lingering on her son. "Something happened?" she asked, cocking an ear like she always does. "Nah." I shook my head. "Just an old generator. Yeah, I prayed me pretty decent, too." "Well, that's good. At least one of us made some cash today." It got easier to smile. "Business will slow again, huh?" "So, try that." As he sighed, he gave her stand a little kick with a hind leg. "Haven't sold a damn thing since we arrived." "I get the feeling you don't like it here." "Not particularly," she drummed, furrowing her brow. "Me neither." I looked at the horizon, then back to my wife. "Well, I get a move on then? Next town isn't too far over. We got a few hours of daylight left. Maybe make it by sundown." Leanne scrunched her lips to one side. Before she could say anything, something else got her attention. When I realized she was looking past me, I turned to see what it was. You know, there was a bar, and the boys that bars into the bar were making down their way down the street. I felt a knot in my stomach, and I noticed that the beaten colt wasn't with them. He grinned and waved at me, and I did the same, but I hoped that he wouldn't stop and start chattering. My hopes were dashed pretty instantly. "Sorry you had to see that back there. We've been having some trouble with a group of ponies that think they might have a right to attack our shipments to free our slaves. Well, that boy you saw was one of them." Then the owner chuckled. "Told us where to find the rest, too. My boys are on the way to deal with them." I looked over at Leanne in time to catch her frowning. "Ain't none of my business," I told him. She glanced up at me, and I gave her a little nudge. "You do what you gotta do. Me and mine are thinking of heading out, though, especially if things get hectic soon." The owner nodded and parked his ears. "Shoot, you're gonna hit the trail. It's only right that my boys see you off. You'll both be heading in the same direction." The grizzled stallions around him gave him an almost confused look. His leads turned to nudge me, and I turned to note the disapproval on her face. Then turned back to the owner and shook my head. "That will be necessary. We've got a full, and now we'll just slow him down. Don't you worry about that now. There ain't no rest to give about there." He went to the horizon, then back to me. "My boys will keep you and your family safe till it's time to part ways. You have my word." "Well, that's my kind of you," I told him, doing my best to look pleased. Slate galloped to my side, peering up at me with a curious look on his face. "Your boys don't mind waiting a bit we can pack up. I'd like to take you up on that offer." He nodded, and the group of them continued their way down the street. As I knelt beside the stand, I heard him say, "That's there a good point, boys. Did a good fine job fixing up our generator, and helping folks around town, too. It's only right to keep it safe and make sure your folks can benefit from his talents." Just before he slipped out of earshot, I heard him add, "Might even back home in Philly. Got a nose red I could use to help." Leanne fixed a sharp, stern gaze on me. "I don't like it." My eyes avoided hers the best they could. "What is this a trap?" She quietly but firmly struck the ground with her hoof. "What if they turn on us while we're out here in the middle of nowhere?" I shrugged. "Seems decent enough." She bared her teeth and pressed her nose to mine. "He's a slave trader for Red Eye." "But he gave us his word," I calmly told her, leaning back. "On top of that, he thinks we're headed to Philly." "And what is that about?" Leonard added. "I thought we were heading up to Manhattan." "What's Philly?" Slate asked, poking his nose between us. "Philadelphia is a town for awful place, Slate." She looked at me dead in the eyes, frowning. "We are definitely not going there." I gave up holding eye contact and focused on packing her merchandise. She progressively followed my example a moment later. "And I just told him what I thought you wanted to hear. And hey, looks like you got us an escort." "You didn't answer my question, though," Leanne said, still frowning. "What are they?" I interrupted her very simply, but very quietly. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that. If it does, I'll be ready.
What happened at the bar?
She asked, looking up at the street, her gaze becoming distant. I don't want to talk about it. Without saying anything further, I stood and looked down at Slate. I remembered that I wasn't haunted by the cult from that bar anymore when he smiled up at me. Go pack up your things, kiddo. There wasn't much to pack, honestly, but Slate raced on ahead of me, letting the door to the inn bang shut behind him. He was already slipping his toys into a saddlebag when I pushed my way into our room. So,
what happens in Philadelphia that makes it awful?
He asked, with innocence only a child is capable of. That's where Red Eye is set up, and your mama doesn't like to use a slate to get things done. He looked at me and tilted his head.
You?
I think I sighed right about then. Then I sat down on the bed. No, but it's really not my place to see what's right or not. He might just make a difference in the wasteland in time. I just hope it's for the best. Slate had already finished packing. He climbed to the bed and sat next to me.
What if it's not?
Well then, I guess some point he's going to have to do something about it. I lifted the hoof to the back of his neck. Stroking his mane made me feel more comfortable talking about it. I just hope that whoever takes over after that don't end up worse than the pony you're replacing. Lean tried in right after that. She still looked a little bent out of shape about her travel plans, but I guess she had accepted it by that point. A few more minutes of packing, and we were on our way out the door, making our way toward the edge of town. The bar owner and his sons were waiting for us by the front gate. Before saying anything, he smiled and gave me a deep nod. Thank you again for your help around here. Now, me and my boys are going to have to break off a little more than halfway to the next town to deal with our little problem. But this is all Red Eye controlled territory. I don't think he'll run into trouble. I nodded, and we stepped toward the gate. As it slowly rattled open, my family and his family stepped down in the wasteland. And don't forget, the owner called to me over the gate, you're always welcome if you're ever in the area. The journey was mostly a quiet one. I could hear the owner's sons up ahead of us, going over the strategy for the assault to come. Slate and Lean leaned close, but only Lean seemed uncomfortable. Eventually, Slate asked,
How come these ponies have been messing with your town?
State, Lean scolded, looking more than afraid than anything.
That's not the proper thing to ask.
One of the owner's sons chuckled. It's all right, ma'am. He looked it back at us and shrugged. We reckon they feel like they have a right to attack us. Ain't you fond of the fact that there was slave trade in town? He snorted softly. But just because they feel like doing the right thing, don't make them right. They've been hurting folks around town that ain't got nothing to do with any of it. They killed one of our brothers last week. Another quip. Guess we're even, huh? The first brother spat. And continued. Anyway, we've been through the motions. Reasoning, bargaining, all that. Ain't got nothing left to do now but keep their things their way and put an end to it. It got quiet again after that. I kept my eye on the stallions in front of us, but every now and then I let my eyes wander. The terrain was pretty rocky, almost mountainous. While the path generally stayed on the high ground, there were plenty of canyons. It was getting dark when they started to slow down. One of them looked back at me and nodded. You folks go all ahead. I know Paul already thanked you to get along back, but, well, thanks. There was a faint glow just over the next hill. They started creeping toward it, drawing their weapons as they went. Lean shook her head and gently pushed Slate onward. I followed. We only made it a few paces before the shooting started. Slate froze in his attack and Lean looked back eyes wide. Mares and stallions shouted frantically and were just as quickly cut short. I was standing behind him, and I remember having to force myself to keep my eyes forward. I waited for their shock to wear off before taking another step. There were a few more pops of gunfire, but the screaming and crying kept right on going. There was a filly somewhere in that mess. Slate looked back again, then looked at me. I shook my head and kept on walking.
You say you don't like it either, Papa.
I stopped. I said it wasn't my business.
But what if Red Eye's wrong? You think it's doing bad. How can you think it'll turn out good?
I turned around. It's more complicated than that, Slate.
No, it's not!
He stopped to furrow his brow.
You don't like it, then you should do something to stop it before it gets worse!
That's when I made a mistake. I started giving it thought. We were out in the middle of the wasteland. No one had followed us. It was just us and them.
Mister.
Lee looked at me, and then at the glow behind the hill. She frowned and shook her head.
Don't.
She knew I already made up my mind. Stay here, I told her. Then I stepped off the beaten path and made my way toward that hill. I had a revolver strapped to my chest, but I considered that a last resort. All the tools I need were right in my saddlebags. I peered over the ridge and saw what was left of the camp. They had been clearly there a while. Lean-tos made out of silverish metal, with an actual hut or two, fire pits crackling, and surviving inhabitants had all been dragged around to the far side of the camp. A few were clearly unharmed, but others had been crippled by their injuries, squirming and bleeding on the ground. Their numbers were a little startling. I only expected 5 or 6, and they were closer to 15 or 20. It was then I realized that the owner's sons hadn't gone there to wipe them out. A few of these ponies had died in the crossfire, maybe. For the most part, they were fine with a little patching up. These ponies had a wagon on site, and now the survivors were being forced into it, one by one. There were a few younger ponies actually standing in the wagon, held there at gunpoint. They were the ones doing most of the wailing. 5 ponies with guns, 3 of which were distracted with loading the wounded into a wagon, keeping them there. The other 2 were standing guard. Slinking up to the camp was no trouble. The fire cast plenty of shadows. Once I had found a hiding spot, it was just a matter of waiting for one of the brothers to come into range. As I waited, I remember feeling how heavy my wrench was. It had seemed heavy back at the bar. One of the brothers stepped past me and paused. I reared up, wrench between my hooves, looked me around the eyes. I feel like for a split second he recognized me. Experience told me that sound wouldn't carry. I brought the wrench down between his ears. He crumpled to a heap, and I dragged him into the shadows with me. He was twitching, trying to reach out. I clubbed him with the wrench until he wasn't recognizable anymore. Until he stopped moving, then I moved on. The next brother called out to the other side of the camp. I dropped to the ground, my neighbor a corpse, and waited. He passed, but not closely enough for me to take him down. I got up slowly and followed. They began to realize something wasn't right, but I expected that. When the pony I was stealing was well enough away from the rest, I made my move. I cracked him across the back of the skull, but he stayed standing, staggering a few more steps. I hit him again, and he tumbled forward, whimpering something. I could feel his blood cling to my face as I finished him off, and it made my stomach turn. There were only 3 brothers left, and they were starting to panic. Sticking around could only do so much good for me while they were close together. I needed to scatter them. The brother I had just killed had been carrying a submachine gun. I got low to the ground as I could, and pointed it skyward, gave the trigger a squeeze. Frenzied hoofbeats and shouting told me I had gotten the desired effect. They started calling out to him again. When they didn't hear a response, he started spraying at shadows. While they were still gripped with paranoia and wasting ammunition, I made my way around the edge of the camp, laying low and behind cover. They switched from cries of concern to guttural threats. Probably figured that one of the survivors had been hiding, waiting for a chance to fight back. I found a new spot and watched. One of the 3 that were left, 2 were slowly advancing, weapons reloaded and ready. The third, once I could see now, had taken a bullet to the flank, stayed by the wagon, keeping a gun on their captives. He was my next target. None of the ponies had raised any kind of alarm as I crept up on them. They knew how to keep quiet, but they didn't stop them from observing, silently acknowledging me. Bludgeoning him seemed too risky with the trigger between his teeth, so I switched to a screwdriver. I lined up to stab him through the spine, but as I was coming to shouts, he turned with eyes wide. Maybe he noticed his captives had their eyes on something. With his neck twisted, I went through his windpipe instead, drawing a muffled gurgle out of him.
This may be a little late to announce, folks, but if you're a little bit skinless about blood, maybe you need to go home!
A few rounds streaked by my face before I could knock his gun away. He staggered back, his wounded leg falling. I wrenched the screwdriver out of his neck. It took 3 solid jabs through the eye socket for him to go still. I remember how horribly sticky the screwdriver felt as I pulled it free. The ponies he had been guarded wasted no time in making their escape, but I wasn't finished yet. My revolver was out and I was behind a rock before the other two could get a clean shot. I dropped one of them as he stumbled towards the wagon, firing wildly as he went down. But the last of the 5 brothers forced me back into cover. He handed me a gun. I could hear him coming closer, swearing furiously over the clamor of suppressing fire. Their operation was a bust, and at that point I figured all he wanted to do was mutilate me in retaliation. Can't say I blamed him. I hate to do this to you, I said loud enough for him to hear. And even though you got a look at me, I don't think he realized who I was until I started talking. I could hear him sputtering. Then finally he roared, "You did this, you motherfucker!" All I could think of to say was, "I did." All he could figure out to think of to say was, "Why? What the fuck did we ever do to you?" He was real close at that point. I had my doubts whether or not I was a faster shot. "What did you do to that cult behind that bar? What was going to happen to the fools you rounded up here?" I held the handle of my revolver to my mouth. "Caps are caps, but you gotta draw the line somewhere." His hoof slowed down just the other side of the rock I was using as cover. I clenched the handle between my teeth and ran my tongue over the trigger. "Yeah? Well, you severed a line when you crossed us. Now!" There was a short burst of submachine gun fire. He stumbled forward and sprawled out to his side, arguing back and screaming. I heard Glenn clattering to the ground behind him.
Let's go.
Lane muttered. She stood over the body of the last surviving brother as he writhed in anger. His back had been pockmarked, trickling out bright, fresh blood. He looked up at me. I couldn't tell if he was pleading or cursing my existence. I shook my head, leveled my revolver, fired. When I raised my head, my heart stopped. Slate was standing a few paces behind his mother, staring at me like I was a hellhound. I wiped the blood on my face and stepped away from the carnage. And that was the end of it. Almost.
"Thank you,"
I heard somebody say. I turned to see a filly behind me. Others were slowly coming back to the camp. Those that were able now tending to the wounded. She smiled up at me, trembling but sincere. I looked her dead in the eyes. "Don't." Her smile vanished to replace a shot.
"But you saved us! You're a hero!"
"No!" She flinched as I stomped. Ponies nearby froze, fixing their eyes on me. "I'm not a fucking hero!" I had their attention now, looking across the faces of the ponies I had saved. "All you listen to me. Listen good. If I hear about what happened here, and I don't care where I hear from, I will hunt each one of you down and fucking kill you! Do you understand me?" Some nodded. All were silent. I turned away, leaving just as quietly as I heard. "We don't talk about this," I told Slate as we walked into the night. "Ever."
Lane added, "What your papa did may have been the right thing, but we're not proud of what we had to do."
I nodded in agreement. "Tonight never happened." All Slate was whimpered.
"Okay."
That was 2 nights ago now. We only stayed the night in the next town over. Spent the rest of the day traveling, trying to put as much distance as possible between us and what I had done. There was no mention of it, word of mouth or otherwise, until this afternoon. I was fixing up some Gyra's auto dock when I heard it. She had her radio on, tuned to one of the few broadcasts that were not stuck on repeat. The music faded out, and DJ started talking, like always.
"Hey folks, DJ Pone 3 here. Like you needed me to tell you that. So did you hear about the one the repair pony who had a change of heart?"
My breath caught in my throat.
"Well, you out in the Badlands, this guy was traveling with a band of red-eyed cronies. And when he split the roundhouse of fresh slaves, took them all down by himself. Didn't even ask for a reward."
I stopped moving entirely, staring at the radio in disbelief.
"I know doing the right thing can be hard, but sometimes you just gotta do it yourself to give other ponies the right idea. You're listening out there? Keep up the good work."
My heart raced in my chest. At first, all I could do was dwell on the memory of the bar. The bar owner I had his radio turned to the same frequency I had been there. I thought back to his sons, barging in, dragging a foal with them. Only this time I was slaked that they had been beaten near senseless. Cringing, I tried to reason with myself. What's the chance he had heard the broadcast? I asked myself. I hadn't exactly been discreet during my stay, and our departure was hardly candid. Paranoia hijacked my train of thought. Even if he doesn't figure it out himself, it will take a genius to put 2 and 2 together. There was no arguing with that. I knew it would only be a matter of time until someone figured out who I was and what I had done. Right on cue, I realized that the giraffe was giving me a curious look. Then she started to smile. It wasn't me, I growled. Ain't no business of mine to mess with slave traders. Caps are caps. Smile faded, and I finished my work so fast I almost forgot to collect my pay. The walk back to the inn was spent puzzling over what to do, or anything even needed to be done, if anything could be done. I doubted that Red Eye would be getting involved, or that the case, he would have already sent in reinforcements or an alicorn long before my arrival. In the broadcast, I was not given a physical description beyond repair pony, was ruled out trouble from Red Eye sympathizers. There had been no mention of my family, which I was immensely grateful for, but the bar owner knew who I was, and he knew I had a wife and son. There was no doubt in my mind that things were made personal. I figured he wouldn't come for me himself. He was easily twice my age, but while he lacked in youth, however, he made up for wealth. It had already been readily apparent to me that even though he lacked a title like mayor or sheriff, it was his town we were passing through. Assassins and mercenaries were in no supply, and that meant they were inexpensive as well. Trying my best to hide my worries as the inn came into sight. Lean put together another stand outside. Smiling as she haggled with a customer. She glanced up and gave me a little wave, and then right back to it. I decided not to spoil her mood with what I heard on the radio. There would be time enough for that later. Slate sat by the doorway, watching the other folks playing in the street. He had a half-hearted smile when he saw me.
Papa,
He said barely above a whisper.
I know you said we wouldn't talk about it, but I still think what you did was right, even if it was scarier than I thought it would be.
It should never stop being scary, I told him. The fact that it did scare you means you're a good pony. Hearing that seemed to relieve him. He smiled and I kissed him on the forehead. I didn't find the courage to have that talk with Lean until hours later, after sleep had nodded off for the night. We were on to bed. Lean had her nose in a book, and I was tired of pretending to sleep. There was no reason to be around the bush. I rolled over and told her plain and simple. I heard something on the radio today.
I heard something too,
She said, looking up from her book.
Not on the radio though, chit-chatting with the customers.
Without realizing it, I asked for confirmation. She just nodded, sighing.
What are we going to do?
She shut her book and turned her eyes without turning her head.
We need to leave. Not too suddenly, but first thing tomorrow morning.
Where will we go?
I have family in Manhattan.
She nodded again, more to herself than anything.
We should be safe staying at Tenpenny.
I'm sorry. That's all I could think of to whisper.
Me too.
She set her book aside and turned away from me.
But we can't take it back.
After several moments of silence on my end, she added,
Try to forget about it and get some sleep, okay?
I remained silent as I slipped off the bed and crossed to the far side of the room. Somewhere in the back of my mind, the urge to run had taken hold. I could still feel it there, telling me to leave, but that was taking too big a risk. Even if I were to split up from my family, I had no guarantee Slate and Lean would be safe. That brings me into now, my only real option. Sitting here, with my eyes on the door, watching, waiting. Dun 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 dun. I don't want to set the world on fire.